Good afternoon as it is now, and thank you for your submissions here and your opening statements. I suppose to go to the Technological University first, I mean, when I started reading your opening statement and about how you assess people for their needs and you have so many reasonable accommodations, I thought this is wonderful. And then I came to the but and the challenges and so on. And I suppose through this committee, and I'm on the Disability Committee as well, we've met different further and higher education institutions, and there is much better awareness around autism and around disability and trying to put in the support, but there's still a long way to go. And I mean, I suppose what really should be happening, we should have a universal design within our higher education where people shouldn't have to declare they're autistic. The supports should be there. Are we still a long, long way off that? I mean, all of the what you've said about the funding there's not sufficient funding, but it's even the way that it's actually allocated and the fact that it's competitive and that it's complex in applying for it. You know, all of those things could and should be easily dealt with, but are we a long way away from the universal design?
Perhaps may I address that again through the different funding that we get. As we're aware, we now have Path 4 under the Access to Higher Education. The Path 4, so the Path initiatives are all trying to increase specific segments of our student population, and that's very much around universal design and specifically, so phase 1 of that at the moment was introduced last year. And we're specifically, to us again, we're very strong. Within my own area, we have a Centre for Pedagogical Innovation and Development, so we're focusing in on universal design, so making our curriculum, making our facilities, etc. So that particular focus, and we look at that through the activities of the areas that work in my area, plus generally across the university and our subcommittees of Academic Council. The funding again, I just to note, we got 162,000 for Path 4 supports, which is around universal design, and that is to try and bridge us into now the next phase of supporting students with intellectual disabilities coming in. Now that level of funding for, as you can imagine, the nature of supports you need those for intellectual disabilities, and again the kind of case management one-to-one and the whole nature of it, you know, is very important. Perhaps I'd pick up on a point that you made earlier on there. Even the physical infrastructure of our classrooms, etc. We'd be very aware now in terms of that universal design and signage and light and space, etc. But if you're to pull out, you know, the lighting of our rooms, etc., like 160,000 wouldn't do an awful lot for me, you know, in terms of that. So it's the managing the expectation, you know, when you announce initiatives like this. And again, I would just like to say I do thank the Minister, and we have that specific focus now in terms of these initiatives. It's the scaling of the investment to support the expectation that we have for our students entering higher education, and again fulfilling the obligation to, you know, our public service provision in terms of higher education. That for us, you know, is our obligation, and we want to fulfill that obligation in terms of our students so that we can see those students graduate. They can contribute to the exchequer, they can be active citizens across the spectrum of autism, and we're here to support that. But I think regularising and increasing realistically the funding models that we have for that, you know, rather than these exceptional, what I call vertical funds of money, rather than the substantial funding that we know we need to support our students, all students.
So basically what's needed is a proper plan and the money then to match.
Yeah, I would agree.
As you say, it can't all be done at once, so to have a plan set out.
Yeah. I know that my colleagues here, like we sit down and we make our returns to the HEA, and it's even that issue about the calendar year versus the academic year. And when we get our fund for students with disabilities, we're trying to plan in a way that's not strategic. It's based on what do we have, what are the number of students, who are we looking after. And again, the monies that can be expended, and it's not in any way to be discriminatory, but a student presenting to us that is deaf, the amount of money that we would spend on one student to support them in terms of hearing supports and an assistant for them, that can eat a huge amount of the fund. So the team are constantly, robbing Peter to pay Paul and being, just highly effective with the monies that we have. And that's what we spend a lot of our time doing, writing reports back to say we've adequately, as public servants, spent the money. But I was a civil servant myself many, many decades ago, and so I know how this works. But I think if we are to be fair to the system and adequately supporting those people who are now presenting as neurodiverse into higher education, we need to back that.
Dr. Pat and Tara as well, I suppose to thank you for organisations like yourselves. You're creating awareness on a constant basis, and I find I'm constantly learning. I'm learning a lot on this committee. I'm learning a lot from engagement with autistic people on a regular basis, and I think society is as well, but there's a long way to go yet. I suppose I recently had a meeting with Employability in my local town, and they help people, disabled people, autistic people, people with mental health issues to try and get into the workforce and to help them to help themselves back into the workforce. But they said there's still a huge issue with employers who have misconceptions about different, as you say, autism is not a disability. I would sometimes describe it as a different ability, and it is a broad spectrum. But there's such a negativity there among some, and it is improving all the time. But I'm just wondering, is there some way of reaching out and creating, more awareness among employers, or has it been done well in some areas? Because I've even had one mother come in to tell me her son had qualified. I think it was a doctorate. It was either a master's or a doctorate, I forget now. And she was inquiring about a position with a local agency, and they were very interested. And then when she mentioned the word autistic, oh, sorry, no, we've no longer any openings. And that's so disheartening for the young man and for his mother. So there's still a way to go. So I'm just saying, we as a committee, what can we do more about that, or have you any suggestions on that? I suppose as well, you talked about a Charter of Rights, and we still find parents have to fight for absolutely everything from the child. As they first recognise that they may be autistic, they have sensory issues, and right through to adulthood. Yesterday I met a couple and they have 7 children. The youngest is only 7 weeks, but the other 6 all have issues, sensory issues. Some have been assessed, others are in the process of being assessed, but they have 6 children with quite significant issues, and they get so little support. They've had to fight for DCA, they've had to fight for carers allowance. It's not fair. So I know you said that we need an autism bill, we need something enshrined in legislation, and we need a proper strategy. And that is something I think this committee needs to be putting forward in our report now in the next few weeks. I suppose just one other issue I was going to ask you about as well, the autism database. We know there isn't enough information on autism, and just how that should be even collected. I know there have been some suggestions that the next census should have more questions on autism in it. Is that the way to go? Because you cannot plan if you don't have statistics, and this country has been guilty of not planning for our services for autistic people and for disabled people, and we see that with the children's services, we see it with adult services. So it's just even how to gather that information, because again, another parents organisation that represent their autistic children have told me that the prevalence rate of autism is increasing, and they've got figures from the north where they see that there's a high rate there, so they're gathering the figures there as you have referenced. So we need to do that here as well, but how best to do that as well, it shouldn't be that difficult, you'd imagine, but you cannot plan without that proper information.
So you need statistics, and the gathering of that information must begin immediately if we're to have any success. And again, I'm really not faith in really strategies and plans unless there is a commitment, to implement them correctly. It has to be done good, and it has to be done well, and there has to be continuity. And this is my problem with governments; they come and go. The continuity must be built in somehow. Like passing the baton, it must be there. Without that, it's going to be this stopgap all the time. and great plans will just sit on the shelf. I was very pleased with the task force report. I mean, it's probably one of the largest reports ever done on autism. And it's lying on shelves somewhere. There are so many recommendations in that are still as valid today as they were 10 years ago. I just wish people would take it off and dust it and really have it, because it's still as valid as when it was done. And had we put those recommendations in place, we wouldn't be sitting here today. We'd have an excellent service for our people. And really that's what we were all striving for.
Yeah.
So, and the start is the data collection. We do need to know where we're going, how long it's going to take us, and we need to give hope to families, to parents, people who have 2 or 3 children with autism or on the spectrum, and there's very little assistance for them.
Yeah. I know there's none. It's very, very poor. It's actually getting worse rather than better, if you look at it for the last few years. Yeah, no, as I said, we've lots of legislation in place for different issues that continues regardless of who's in government. So if this legislation was put in place, then it's there to stay and support autistic people and their families. So that's what's needed. Thank you.